So today is Reformation Day. It's the end of our sermon series. We've been talking about Reformation all month. The spirit of Reformation, how Martin Luther, 501 years ago, when he nailed the 95 Theses to the door at Wittenberg, didn't do so to change the church just for the sake of change. He did it to change the church for the sake of improvement, to get it right. And so, in that spirit, we've been talking about ways in which we can get it right in our lives. And today we wanted to talk about the church. The church, what we can do to get the church where it needs to be, to get it right, to improve the church. And I think the way that we get it right as a church is we go back to the basics of faith. We go back to the basics of what it means to be the church. Back to the basics of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, grouped together. The first thing that we do together when we come together, the very first thing that we do is we proclaim what we believe. That is, we believe that Jesus is Lord. That's what brings us together. The belief, the shared common belief that we have together is that Jesus is Lord. I was thinking the other day, so for over 8 years now, we've had the opportunity to worship together. And I've never up here, I've never told anyone how to vote. We've talked politics, but I've done my best to stay in the middle. And when we have talked politics, we've talked politics not in the partisan way. And I was thinking the other day, I just had this moment of this epiphany, thank you, that I'm really glad that I serve a congregation that has diversity of thought. That there are people here who believe different things about different things. Politically, we have different ancestry, we have different truths that govern our lives. I'm really glad that I serve a congregation that doesn't want me to tell you how to vote. I'm really glad that I serve a congregation where people can vote differently and still get along. Because there is a greater common theme that we have. That which makes us who we are is not how we vote. It's not the family we grew up in. It's not the nationality that we can trace our ancestry to. It's that we all believe in Jesus Christ. And that is the most important thing in our life, is that our faith that Jesus is Lord is more important than all the other truths that we hold true to in our lives. Jesus is Lord, and that truth that he talks about in John, that truth sets us free from holding on to everything else. We can disagree in 1,000 different ways, but we are united in our faith that Jesus is Lord. Now, I think it's important that we say, on Reformation Sunday, that gathered together, we are Christians. We are believers in Jesus. We are followers of Jesus, more than we are Lutherans. Our Lutheran heritage, our Lutheran theology, helps us to understand what it means to be a Christian. And so it helps us to be Christians, but it is not more important than being a Christian. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I think that's an important thing that we must all agree upon. That we gather today. That we gather today because Jesus came to us. He lived here on this earth. And he died for us. And he rose again. And ascended into heaven so that all the promises of God could be given to us. So that we might have hope. So that we might know that we are loved. First and foremost, we gather because Jesus is Lord. Second, we gather as the body of Christ. To function as the body of Christ. Called to live out as the body of Christ. To function as the body of Christ in the world. To take over, if you will. To do the things that Jesus was doing while Jesus was here. Because Jesus couldn't reach everybody while he was here. He was just one man. And so Jesus called disciples, right? And he taught them. And he said, when I leave, I need you to take over. I need you to do the things that I'm doing now. I need you to feed the hungry. I need you to support those in need. And I need you to proclaim the good news. I need you to proclaim the good news. I gotta tell you, days like today are really hard to preach. When news breaks that people are killed, when news breaks that bombs are sent, I will tell you, the last thing I want to do is stand up here and proclaim good news. Because bad news is everywhere. And it's really hard to keep believing that good news has won, that Jesus is here, that love will win. Bad news everywhere we turn. But we, as the body of Christ, are called to proclaim good news, especially when the world needs it the most. And today is a day where the world needs to hear good news, because we've had a week of bad news. It's had longer than, it was just 2 weeks ago that a major hurricane hit Florida. And we're not even talking about that anymore. The world needs to hear good news, because it seems as though hatred is growing. And when we find hatred, we need to respond with love. When the world sees hatred, the world also needs to see love. Because where there are words of hatred, oftentimes there are actions of hatred. And so the world needs to hear words of love followed by actions of love. And so we are called to bring love to where there is hatred. We are called to bring light to where there is darkness. We are called to bring life to where there is death. This world has decided that hatred and death are the way to go. But our God says no. Life and love are my way. Life and love will win out in the end. And I need you, my church, to go out and proclaim that light and love and life will win out. So that is what we are called to do. To be the light in the darkness. To be love where hatred seems to be winning. And to be open to whatever God would do through us and for us. And finally, we need to realize that we are a church on the move. We are a church are going somewhere. The church has been on the move for 2,000 years. Ever since Jesus called the first disciples, ever since Jesus died and rose again and ascended into heaven, the church has been on the move. The church has been doing something. Now, we tell the story of Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a very important person, and his faithfulness is something that is inspiring. It's inspiring. And the difference that he made in the world shows us how the church has moved. Martin Luther was a big, important person in the movement of the church to get us to where we are today. But we realize that the church is still moving into the future. I've had conversations with pastors for several years about what is the church going to look like in 20 or 30 or 40 years. What is the church going to look like? Am I still going to have a job? These pastors who serve congregations that aren't growing, who worry about, will there be anybody left in 20 or 30 years? And I say the same thing. We don't know what the church is going to look like in 20 or 30 years. But we know that God will still be with us. We know that God will still be with us. I love the text from the psalm today. We should not fear even though the earth may change. We should not fear even though the church may change. Because we have the one thing that is unchangeable. We have God. The church will look different. The church will move. The ELCA may merge with another church, or we may split. All these things could happen because they've happened for 2,000 years. But we need not fear because we have God. We need not fear because we have faith. The world continues to need the church. To need the church, the Christian church, at its best. The world needs an improved church to meet the problems of today and tomorrow. And the church will meet the needs of the world if we could remember what we believe, what we're called to do, and that we are being led by God into an uncertain future. But all will be okay because Jesus is still Lord. Yesterday, today, and for all the tomorrows there will ever be.